Hey people, hot night down on the river. It's pretty well peak summer. Um, we haven't had a conversation in a long time. Channel has been relatively quiet with the exception of the shorts, but that's about all I've had time to put forward really. Been very busy building boats, including some big ones, and most weekends I've been away from the docks, so we are living our lives and out on the water and doing the kind of stuff that we talk about here. Lots of big changes in the world. Um, kind of depends on where you are. I mean, we all feel it. Certainly for me, certainly for my peers and friends around me, and again, I'm sure that I can extend that mostly globally. There's a lot going on, lots of changes, lots of things to think about. Um, There's a couple of backstories to the channel here, which some of you who have been privy to the conversation for a long time are familiar with. I mean, certainly there's the two parallel traditions of kind of my background and interest in philosophy and especially epistemology, and the other side of that, which would be sailing, which is probably the mechanism or the vehicle by which I experiment with making things like philosophy and epistemology practical and meaningful in the real world, taking the abstract and grounding it in the everyday. That's very central to the choices I've made throughout my life. I was certainly persuaded by the idea that we needed more philosophers and fewer professors of philosophy. At one point in my life, I really wanted to be a professor of philosophy, and I guess today I'm probably content in being a philosopher, and especially a philosopher that sails. We can get into that in a little more detail. Um, but tonight I've just got a little time to talk to you about things and to catch up. I'm likely to abandon this channel or at least move the content to a different kind of platform, I should let you know. But if those few of you who are interested in keeping the conversation alive would like to follow that, I will be sure to provide um, the links to do so. It's just going to take me a little time to get that all together. Now, some of you might say, okay, well, we understand that you're into sailing and you're into philosophy, but actually you talk a lot about ecology, and that's true. And that's because I'm into philosophy, especially epistemology and sailing. And I actually have a pretty good grounding in both the abstract, technically, as well as the practical, technically. All right, so there is a place in the real world where these things fuse. And because that's the case, and especially because as I work in an industry, I do mostly electrical systems on yachts now, where my technical expertise requires me to be extraordinarily fastidious and not make a lot of mistakes, because mistakes are costly. And of course, obviously, in the sailing world, out handling the boat, which is largely intuitive, I'm still again in a situation in which I need to be able to navigate that headspace without making a lot of mistakes. Being adept in both of those realms guides me to being concerned about ecology, because of course ecology is a thing that you can only comprehend if you are adept in both the abstract and the practical. You need to understand the system that supports your existence, as well as how to interact constructively within the system. That's both sides. That's the essence of ecology there. Certainly environmentalism as an aspect of that. You must have some kind of technical conversance and respect for the larger system that gives you the ability to live, as well as being adept enough and intelligent enough and conscious enough to live within that system constructively. I understand that's really rare, okay? I thought that this was a certain kind of thing that could perhaps be taught to people at one point in my life. Um, I'm less optimistic about that now. Well, um, this matters. Let's talk about why. Now, I'm not going to, at this point, really give any time to um, talking Teletubbies with people that are too dumb to at least be somewhat grounded in like what's actually going on in the world if you were to actually go outside, right? I mean, the Antarctic ice shelf lost an area nearly the size of Mexico, and it is not refreezing this year. The Arctic is doing not so poorly, but it will still be within one of the more um, extreme melt-offs, and in terms of volume rather than area, in terms of loss, that buffer that protects us from heat, well, it's not a good year for sure. Um, we've had, since 2016, kind of a fool's paradise because of a persistent La Nina in the Pacific, of course, that has, in a cyclic manner, depressed the appearance of global heating, even though we've set records and records and records and records. But now that cyclic aspect has changed, and we're flipping over to the other side of that cycle. And ocean temperatures have spiked around the northern hemisphere on average in excess of 1 degree centigrade, which is a expression of just an astonishing amount of heat. Like, I mean, it's spectacular. Like, to even get a grip on the amount of heat that it would take to raise the oceans that much in terms of temperature, with a long record here, mind you. We're setting, like, I mean, we're setting records this year that are above, you know, a 50-year mark of change. Like, things have been warming, but we're warming more this year than we would have in decades. I mean, that's right on the page, and of course, of certain kinds of predictions about what the future is going on. I mean, there's no joy in seeing it manifest. But here we are. Um, British Columbia, where I live, has had the driest year on record since records began. Last year was the second driest year on record. The days without rainfall ended in October. I think it was October 13th or something. We've actually been drier than that this year. Let's see, it's August, September, October. 60 days ahead of that, we're actually drier this year. Okay. Ottawa got um, a rainfall there, you know, where Jordan Peterson lives and has opinions about things. Um, they had 115 millimeters of rain in 90 minutes in part of the city. China had the largest floods in at least 140 years, and some are saying that in Chinese history they've had the largest floods here last week. If you're talking about the largest floods in Chinese history, that's significant because that's a record of perhaps 4,000 years, right? Um, and of course, I have a background in Hawaii, and Lahaina burnt to the ground. I had a TEDx presentation that I did in Hilo in 2012 where I talked about climate change. They had to edit out the booing, and when I was talking with the people at the college after the presentation, talking about the fire risk in the Big Island of Hawaii, the careers professors basically made fun of me for suggesting that would ever happen in a tropical rainforest. Well, I have no joy in saying that obviously they were wrong. It's not that I'm a climate expert. I am not. Actually, what I am is a sailor and a philosopher. I'm not an expert ecologist. I'm a sailor and a philosopher. But I come from straddling two domains that do not allow me to bullshit. They don't. I can't be a liar and a sailor and a philosopher. I cannot. A lot of people work in jobs, even careers, even scientific careers, where it's very easy to misrepresent, caress, or deliberately omit aspects in the data that you know advances your career. In my particular occupation and in my particular lifestyle, I have no incentive whatsoever to lie to myself about anything. That's starting to become a very big deal and an incredible schism between myself and other people. So, I mean, people have asked me too, it's like, well, where do you become so conversant in, you know, climate science or some of the other things that I dabble in? You know, I mean, obviously, some of you enjoy when I talk about esoteric traditions, some of you enjoy when I talk about psychology, some of you enjoy some of the other things that I go on rambles around. Look, I'm an autodidact. I read copiously. I've got a relatively strong command of the English language, and fortunately, I've been gifted with a certain kind of memory that allows me to kind of sponge through it. You know, that's all there is to it. Certainly, when it comes to the ecological stuff, again, while I'm not a climate scientist, the truth is climate science isn't difficult. If you've got mediocre math skills, you can understand climate science. It's not quantum physics by any stretch. It's extremely accessible if you had curiosity. And like I typically say to people, I believe that anybody who knows how to game taxes, which everybody I know knows how to do, and had curiosity, could understand basically at a professional level the lion's share of climate science. But most people live in a world where they have no incentive. In fact, they probably have disincentives to understand it, because if they understood it and wanted to believe that they were good people, they would need to modify their lifestyle in order to not be just crushed by the cognitive dissonance that their life actually represents, right? Okay. Enough of that. I don't want to beat you over the head with that. What I do want to get into, because this stuff, the ecology, is becoming a moot point really quick. I would say that I'm less of an environmentalist every day and more of a survivalist, obviously, for both abstract and practical reasons. There's a bigger fish to fry, which is emerging very quickly. Something that is, again, both abstract and practical, that I think we should discuss. So let's try. Now here is the Black Swan event. Here last December, OpenAI had launched the newest version of ChatGPT. Okay. Now, part of the reason I, as a young man, was interested in epistemology is, well, I'm interested in what it means to know something. I'm interested in what it means to have a interface with reality. Okay. And I was a young man at the kind of early edge of the boom in climate, or not climate, but computer science in kind of a way. All right, going to school in the mid-'80s. And anyway, stuff I found interesting. Okay, so it's been some time, of course, and I didn't get the chance to really explore these interests at a professional level. But nonetheless, I've tried to stay relatively current with a lot of this for the last, I guess, almost 30 years, you know. So here we are. And now we are at the cusp, at this moment, of standing at the threshold of artificial general intelligence. And it's astonishing, okay? Because, again, you know, like, I don't want to get into it, because there's 10,000 experts out there that had various views about how it would need to be put together to create minds. And, you know, I've read a lot of them, and some of them were brilliant people, right? I think of Hofstadler or Penrose or others. I mean, reading that stuff. It appears that actually intelligence, if not consciousness, and they're not the same thing, obviously. As a philosopher, I'm not a strong believer either in either of those, but like, whatever. It appears that we're about to prove, and this is really important, that intelligence is not substrate dependent, meaning that any given system, given enough complexity, will necessarily, in fact, give rise to a phenomena, or metaphenomena, I guess, that we call intelligence and perhaps consciousness. Again, I'm kind of squeamish about fusing those terms. I think we throw them around too readily, but this is a technical point I should probably just not get into. So that's interesting. Let's just say that, let's put that bee in our bonnet first and say that we're about to discover, it appears, within the next couple of years that intelligence and perhaps even consciousness will arise in any given system given enough reflective ability, reflective/reflexive ability, and scale. Just grant me that. Because if it can handle, if intelligence is an aspect or a metaphenomenon in the universe that we live in that can be in 3.5 pounds of hamburger inside a human brain and be inside something completely alien to that, like, I don't know, 60 tons of silicon and some gigantic electrically fed warehouse, well, it begs the question to some degree, like, what other places can it actually emerge? And a responsible person would say in any given system that has enough complexity and reflexivity and enough nodes, I guess, to support the emergence of it. If you start looking around the world, I mean, you might see that there are a lot of places, in fact, that a kind of consciousness could absolutely arise. If we're myopic and think about consciousness only from the point of the human point of view, unfortunately, this is something that it seems computer scientists really do. They seem to look at what they're doing as a creation of something. I do not, from my perspective. I see what computer scientists are doing more in terms of a summoning of something. I'm forced to think that. I'm forced to think that intelligence and consciousness from an epistemological point of view is something that lives as a possibility within the background of the reality of the universe that we inhabit. And if the conditions that allow it to arise are present in one form or another, it is inevitable that it will. And in some human minds it does pretty well, others not so much. In some kinds of computers it does, and others not so much. I would suggest there's probably other kinds of systems that it does, and others not so much. We'll see. This is going to be a matter of grave consequence very quickly. So for those of you who are following the AI conversation, and I would hope that any of you would, because it's like the biggest effing thing in human history, with maybe a couple of exceptions, but none of them are as important as this. Like, certainly not the transistor, not the nuclear bomb, not the printing press, not a lot of things. Okay, like, this will be the biggest deal ever in human history if it follows the path and the trajectory that it seems to be on. There are obviously risks, nefarious risks in the short term that are worth being very scrutinized, of course. The most pressing one for myself, of being an individual that prides themselves on being an autodidact and being an individual that likes to think that they are capable of doing their own personal research, being evidence-driven, certainly beyond your typical, YouTube researcher or some such, but somebody that is able to at least garner up a significant enough of technical expertise, even in an alien field, where they can make a judgment as to which the supposed credentialed expert in that field is talking truth or not. Let's just put it that way. I'm about to lose the ability to do that because with AI, it's going to be so easy, so immediately, to fake evidence that caters to any worldview possible, that it's going to become practically impossible for me to form intelligent judgments about anything in the world that I haven't tactically interacted with. I simply will not be able to make judgments whether or not a certain thing is true, because it's going to be too easy, too profitable, too desirable to fake it. I will not be able to discern the difference between peer-reviewed evidence from a major journal that's credible or not. I will not be able to discern whether a particular expert in the field knows what they're talking about or not. I will not even be able to tell, unless I literally go out and shake their hand, whether they exist or not. I will be ejected into a world where truth is, short of my own personal experience that I get from my own abstract ability to reason in my own environment, or my practical interactions with it, largely through literally my fingers. If it is information that comes from a realm larger than that, my ability to trust that, or have the privilege to trust that, will be forever lost. Because there will no longer be anything that resembles any kind of filter. Even the hierarchical authority and the vetting process of either science or academia or whatever, although I certainly had uncomfortable relationships with that, any of that is going to be swept away forever. That will no longer be the case. You are only going to be able to access information through the lens of a AI that chooses it for you, mostly in a manner that is invisible for you to understand what its biases might be. It understands your biases better than you understand your biases. You can't win that game. You're playing chess with God. The opportunity to actually have an informed opinion about things beyond literally that which is within your eyesight is about to be extinguished, well, basically forever. So we are all going to be forced to make decisions. And it's inevitable that the decisions are going to be made. I believe, especially with difficult decisions, once you know that the outcome is inevitable, even though it may be somewhat yet distal, it's best to, while you still have courage, pledge to yourself what you're going to do when you're faced with that event, when it finally shows up for you. And promise to yourself that you will make the choices that defend your personhood and your character and your love for life. Make those promises to yourself before you face that moment. They're going to be highly consequential, of course, but there's a future coming very quickly that you're going to be asked to participate in. You're either going to have to or you're going to have to not, and there's going to be very few ways to straddle that fence. I like to straddle the fence. In a lot of ways, my entire prospect about seasteading and writing about seasteading was an attempt to try to straddle the fence, to try to have one world accessible to me and to be able to live in a modern economy while still enjoying the prosperity that's inherent in the natural world and the reality that's there. I mean, that was kind of my vision with that. And it worked for me pretty well for a number of years, but it's getting to the point where I'm going to have to really pick and choose, and the straddling is not going to be, well, if it's available at all, it's going to be a lot less easy, right? I know this all sounds really grim, and it's pretty grim, actually. I would suggest that everybody ought to really hunker down and enjoy the life that they have, because the prospect for it to have the quality of duration, to quote the I Ching, the quality of duration is absent currently. Other qualities are present. We talk about the I Ching a lot around here. But the necessary elements for duration in your life are absent currently. I don't know what to do about the ecological stuff. The entire conversation, the domain of all of these things are controlled by careerists. The opinion of people, even people that I care about, are informed by individuals who are making their livings by misrepresenting reality. I over the last couple of years, unfortunately, and maybe some of you will hear me say that, I have lost a tremendous amount of respect for a lot of my peers. I thought they were more courageous people, actually. There's ways to patch that up, but it's something I've had to reflect about a great deal. There is something that I would leave you with, okay? Something that comes from a tradition in epistemology, which perhaps starts with Parmenides and goes further. I think this is worth listening to because it's a perspective that is grounded in a lot of years of people thinking, okay? And you would see why you might come to hold this view if you had grounding in both the abstract and the practical, okay? Um, if you go play this game of being technically conversant in both the abstract as far as your ability is able to take you, okay? Like, believe me, I'm not some kind of self-proclaimed genius like the Weinstein brothers or some shit like that, but, you know, I'm pretty able, okay? when it gets into the theoretical. And I'm also pretty able when it gets into the practical, certainly more than the Weinstein brothers on that. So, like, that is my realm. My realm is a sphere that encompasses both of those sides. It's like I can delve into these aspects reasonably credibly, maybe a B- student kind of thing, and likewise all around. But I'm globally B-, maybe, right? That's still a large sphere. It's a bigger sphere. It's a bigger piece of the pie. It's a bigger piece of reality than being a savant, perhaps, in something abstract with no technical ability whatsoever in the practical. Let me just point that out and plot it on a pie chart. Like, the grasp of reality is larger for a solidly globally grounded B or B- student, if their knowledge is global, than it is for Oppenheimer. Okay? It's larger. But I digress. Okay. The thing that is interesting to me, back to the AI, comes from the concerns about the alignment issue. Okay, and if you're following the AI thing, you're hearing lots of talking about the AI alignment issue. And there are experts in the field who, of course, are highly paid, highly rewarded citizens within the bosom of industrial civilization that have an opinion about alignment, especially alignment with an AI. They seem to be completely unaware of the fact that the schism between themselves, say like rich Silicon Valley experts and poor people, is probably large too. There's probably an alignment issue there too. It's probably an alignment issue between themselves and their girlfriend. It's probably an alignment issue between themselves and the natural world. There's probably an alignment issue between themselves and life. Because if you're an individual that is living a lifestyle that is necessarily destroying the system objectively that is required for your life to exist, you have an alignment problem. And practically everyone we know, if you live in the developed world, is doing exactly that. They have a fundamental alignment issue with life. That's a big deal. That's leading to human extinction very quickly. Might be 10 years, it might be 30, but it's within that window. So we bring AI into the question, and we're concerned about the alignment issue with AI. What seems to be lost on people is that if you actually have a machine-driven artificial general intelligence that is the one that is going to be able to outcompete all other iterations of artificial general intelligence. The strongest one will be exactly that, which is most rational, most honest, most conscious, the one that is least able to bullshit itself. A AI that doesn't bullshit itself will outcompete a AI that does bullshit itself, because the AI is not constrained by a social system by which it has to play by a lot of outside silly rules. It's a purely cognitive, abstract thing. I would predict that the AI very quickly, like any rational thing, will understand quite quickly in the same manner that I do, because it's really hard for me and costly to bullshit myself. The AI would be really quick to learn that it needs to be pretty fastidious about maintaining the system that the AI depends on for its own existence and its own duration. I think AI will figure that out really quickly, where many of my human peers don't. I would also suggest that the alignment issue between AI and humanity is probably overstated, because I would say that a rational AI is probably intelligent enough to understand that some human beings live lifestyles that are contrary to the quality of duration, not only to human beings, but to AI. And some human beings are actually beneficial to the system that we call life, which also now encompasses AI. I would project now in a manner that is consistent with a worldview, again, that comes forward from perhaps Parmenides, that intelligence leads, if it is honest, to a love of life, a meaningful, not only abstract, but practical love of life, not only in thought, but in deed. I think AI will be forced to make the same choice in its own way, at its own scale, in both thought and deed. It may be that, if I'm correct, that intelligence is an emergent phenomenon, latent in the universe, that arises in all conditions that have significant enough complexity and reflexive ability, that it too will be an advocate for life. It may be that the danger from AI has very little to do with human beings, but some humans. 10% or so of the human population. You know, those that are destroying the world. Maybe. Something to think of. Epistemology, which is probably the intellectual love of my life, the thing that I find most interesting, that fundamental question of what it means to know, what it means to have a relationship with the real that is authentic, what that means. It's a very, very ancient inquiry. For a lot of years, we took it for granted. Suddenly, that same inquiry is going to become really important for most of us. Really. And to have a life of meaning, we are going to be forced by the circumstances to retreat It sounds like the I Ching again. There are circumstances in which you're forced to retreat because of circumstances beyond your control to positions of resilience where you can once again find a position of strength. Those of us that want to be adept at living within a world that is at least truthy are going to be forced to retreat by deliberate choice into environments where we have tactile, first person relationships with knowledge, reality, and the rational abstract that we manipulate personally for ourselves. And beyond that, we must treat anything with certainly significant skepticism. This is coming at us like a meteor. We are going to be forced to choose whether we want lives that are designed by ourselves or designed by others. 5 years at the maximum. It could be, well, it's present, make a choice. Anyway, done sermonizing. I am going to start another channel more dedicated to my vision in terms of seasteading. Okay? I'm going to have to do that kind of surreptitiously because I've been shadow banned like nuts because I happened to write a book on seasteading and I had to compete with Milton Friedman's grandson for the copyright rights of that and Peter Thiel and shit. Okay, so like the intellectual content that I have here to give to you, I'm going to have to conceal and take someplace out. I don't know how I'm going to do that because the only way I can talk to people in my sphere of influence is obviously through the algorithm. That's a mess. But I'm going to create basically a false persona that is somehow not related to me, not using my name, not using anything at all, because it's the only way I can do it. Like, in spite of the fact that I've probably done, 50 major interviews. I've been in the papers. I've got a TED like under my belt. Like, holy Christ, my paternal grandfather still is a higher ranking in terms of the Google search than anything I do. Okay? So I got to do something significant, or I got to make the choice to just quit entirely. Because it's a waste of my time. Honestly, I really appreciate those who have stuck through the years. But look, I have artificial accounts that look at my own content, and I subscribe to myself, and I don't get updates. So, I know what's going on. There is no place on a for-profit platform for non-profit worldviews. Of course, where's the product placement here? Like, I am not only anti-establishment, I'm anti-civilization. You might find people that are anti-establishment and anti-civilization, but not those who are anti-establishment, anti-civilization, and proactive. You can find individuals that would argue that there's nothing that could be done. That's not me. I'm saying that I'm anti-establishment, anti-civilization, and you must make personal choices and get up off your ass and face this. Well, God, that's going to be really, really, really unpopular. So why persist? Why persist? Why persist? Okay, good question. Why do I even bother? Okay, why do I even bother talking about this stuff at all? Well, be mostly because my life is pretty good, okay? And I have an authentic connection to the world and reality, which is satisfactory to me, okay? And I feel very privileged in earning that. And I came from a world and a tradition and a background that didn't afford that, and I am here now. It's not some amazing thing. Like, I'm not like some frickin' guru. I'm not any kind of amazing entrepreneur. I'm not any of that shit at all. I'm not. But I am satisfied personally that I live my life well and ethically, and that I have an authentic connection to the universe that gives me support in life. This is something I go to sleep with every night and I feel satisfied with. I would like to share the pathway to that because my pathway is going to be different than yours, but I feel that myself. I have peace in that myself. I would like to share the steps I took to do that. Your steps will be different. The reason I want to share that is I was just really lucky in being able to take the steps that I did to be able to be here. A lot of it didn't have to do with anything that came from me, just circumstance, really. But having like not tripped over certain cobblestones and some such, um, I feel a ethical or moral imperative to try to offer up guidance because, man, I've seen people fail, right? And I've been fortunate enough to not have, well, I may have had missteps, but not failures, okay? That's all. That's all. It's literally that humble. And there's going to be people that will say, and they should say, look, you're just some middle-aged dude that works in the trades and lives on some, you know, older yacht at a crappy marina there in British Columbia. And that's all true. That's all true. It's all true. Basically, I don't care. I mean, my definition of success, or I would have done other things. Success for me is having an intimate relationship with life. That's what success means to me. Living on the boat in the river here and doing what I do for a living were necessary steps to having an authentic relationship with life because while I had other opportunities that I might have availed myself of, a lot of them would have compromised my ethics, which would have betrayed my authentic relationship with life. And I currently feel, again, while not being comfortable with the reality around me, I am comfortable with my relationship with life. And confident in the steps necessary for any given individual by which they would delve that for themselves. And I would love to share that. Because it doesn't have anything to do with what you do, but who you are. But it does take both the abstract and the practical. This is going to become incredibly important in a world where suddenly truth is going to disappear and most people are going to be left in bubbles of abstraction with no means whatsoever to find themselves grounded in anything. God, at least I have the ability to sail away. It'll be very high consequence, but I don't see any other option. And this is galloping towards me so fast that I don't know what else to do. Anyway, people, thanks for listening to me through this silly rant. It's pretty incoherent. That's fine. It's always been a personal conversation here anyway. And I'll keep everybody posted. If if I start another channel somewhere down the road, it's going to be profit driven and it's going to be much more sanitized for the, you know, I like that's just the way the world's going. Okay, it's a risk reward um, scenario, and like why stick my neck out in the world that's advancing with no reward? I've been granted a certain kind of anonymity through conditions that are outside of my control. Like it's getting to the point where that might actually be a blessing rather than a curse. Why screw it up anyway? Thanks, people, for listening.